I want to thank Sam Green for sharing these beautiful and haunting films. And now I'd like to introduce him to you, along with our moderator for tonight's Q&A, Joe Wihl. Based in Abu Dhabi, Joe is an experienced film and television producer-director, having produced television, documentaries, music videos, promos, and feature films around the world. His notable projects include the feature film Panic, about people trafficking in the UK, and the television show Majlis Mohammed bin Zayed, produced in the UAE. Joe has created and co-founded two film festivals, the Al Sidr Environmental Film Festival and the Cinemas Film Festival at Manarat Al Saadiyat, which he took online for its 2020 edition. We hope to see you at upcoming events, including next Monday's screening of Sophia by Mariam Ben Mubarak as part of Cinema, as well as Toshi Regan's post-election sacred transmission on Friday, November 6th. And now please welcome Sam Green and Joe Wihl.
Sam, thank you so much for joining us today. And thanks, Bill, and all the team at the Arts Centre at NYU Abu Dhabi for hosting this short films and discussion. After, we'll have a, if anyone's got any questions, please drop them in the Facebook chat, and I'll ask them in about 15, 20 minutes. Sam, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.
There's a real poetry and beauty to this selection of shorts. I love what you do with this artistic medium, but shorts are so often neglected or seen as a calling card. Yet you were already an Oscar-nominated filmmaker when you made these. So what drives you to keep making shorts? Why do you keep making shorts?
Oh, shorts are so fun to do, I think. And all of the films I make, whether they're long films or short films, come out of just a curiosity about the world. And I like to poke around and look into things all the time. And sometimes it's just something that really captures me, but it's small. And that's like a little poem. And if you want to make something out of it, it doesn't need to be big. It can just be small. So for the Pet Cemetery, for example, that's exactly what happened to me. I mean, I said it in the voiceover. My friend took me to the airport. We got there early. She said, "Do you want to look at this pet cemetery?" I said, "Sure." And we just walked around the pet cemetery laughing at all the different headstones and saying, "Oh, look at this one, look at this one." And so I basically just made a film poem out of that experience. And all the other films came about in similar ways. So there's some things that merit a long film and some things just a short one. It's also, for me, really helpful to experiment with different techniques of filmmaking with a short, to try out certain things and see how that works. So I do it for two reasons: to make something small and then to try different ideas.
That's really inspiring to see how different things work. And with longer form pieces, you've collaborated with co-directors quite often, whereas the shorts are often by yourself. How does that collaboration work? How are you as a collaborator?
I love collaborating with people. I mean, as you know, filmmaking is hard and lonely work. And working with other people is just fun, or should be fun. And I always feel like a good collaboration is when you make something that's better than either person would have made alone. And I can honestly say that every film I've made with other people, that's been the case. And maybe I have a good sense of how to pick people to work with, or I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just luck, but I feel very fortunate to have been able to work with people. And yeah, it's also, like I said in the beginning, just funner. And that's important, I think, for me at least.
Talking about collaboration, can you tell us about your collaboration and your live experience with people like Yola Tango and Kronos Quartet? I was lucky enough last year to see you in Abu Dhabi, and it was one of the most beautiful cinematic experiences I've had in a long time. It was really special to bring together all these things we love about cinema live. I felt very lucky to see that. So if you could tell us about that collaboration with the musicians and your live cinematic projects.
Well, it's sort of a long spiel, but I'll make it short. For the past 10 years or so, I've been making these live cinema pieces, which are all the elements of a movie, but it happens only live. So there's images on the screen, and I narrate in person, and a band or musicians do a live soundtrack. And so these are pieces you can't watch on YouTube or stream on iTunes or anything like that. You have to be there, and we tour around presenting these works. So we were in Abu Dhabi 2 years ago or a year and a half ago and did a screening there. I did a piece with the Kronos Quartet. It was a portrait of them, and they performed the soundtrack, and that was one of our best shows. It was a really special screening, and I've kept coming back to that form because I like it so much. There's such a power in using huge images and big sound and getting people into a theater where they turn their phones off and they give themselves over completely to the experience. I mean, I love the internet, don't get me wrong, and this is amazing. We're doing a screening with people from all over the world. There's live translation, which I'm very excited about, and I hope is working. So that's incredible, but there's also something about being in a room with strangers and really letting yourself be part of this bigger collective experience that's powerful. So I'm trying to still work in that universe. And one of the things I like most about it is that I get to work very closely with musicians. And normally you'd get musicians to make a soundtrack to your film, and then you'd invite them to the premiere and shake hands, and that would be it. But with these live cinema pieces, I tour around with musicians. And maybe it's just that I always wished I was in a band. I never was in a band, so this is as close as I can get. But it's just great fun. We go all over the world, and I've done this with Yola Tango and with Kronos Quartet, and now I'm doing this with J.D. Sampson, and I'm fascinated by musicians. I love the way they work. It's very different than filmmakers, and it's made my own practice way richer.
As a filmmaker who tours, you're like a touring band. How has this year been with what have you been doing? How's life changed for a touring filmmaker?
Yeah, it's been tough on one hand because Kronos Quartet and I had a ton of screenings that were all canceled or postponed. So that stinks because the work only really lives when we're out showing it to people. So as far as the world is concerned, this work isn't around at the moment, and that's hard. Also, I make a living by touring around, so that's doubly tough. But the upside of it is that I've had a lot of time, and I've been able to work on this new project I'm doing about sound. Called 32 Sounds, which Bill mentioned at the beginning, which I just love working on. It's such a pleasure, the research, and I've never had such a good time putting a project together. So that's good. And hopefully by next year, people will be comfortable being back in a theater again, I hope.
Can you tell us more about 32 Sounds?
Yeah, it's a kind of essay about sound, and often when I tell people about it, I just get a kind of blank look because sound is such a huge topic, and sort of like, okay. But it's an essay about sound built around 32 specific recordings of things. And it's a wide range of recordings, from the foghorns in San Francisco to the sound of John Cage's stopwatch to all sorts of things. And so I'll narrate it, and there'll be images on the screen. J.D. Sampson will do live music, and everybody in the audience will wear headphones. So it'll be a very powerful audio experience. And I'm looking forward to really making something that pushes the boundaries in terms of cinema and sound. It goes much further than anything I've seen, at least. So that's exciting.
That's amazing. You are really pushing the boundaries with cinema. Just about like the short film process, like how do you crew up? One of the things I love about the films is they feel really personal. They feel like a small crew, you're in a small group, and then with a live experience, it's much more immersive. But tell me about how you make the two types of films.
Well, it's really different. At this point, my shorthand is regular films. There's live films, which are in a theater, and then I just call them regular films, that can screen anywhere. And it's a lot different. What works in a live situation doesn't necessarily work you streaming it on your own computer. The timing is a lot different. And so the Louis Armstrong piece, for example, the first piece you saw actually is a live piece, and I do that in person. And I just sort of turned it into a regular movie that you could stream as part of this program, but it doesn't quite work in the same way. That piece, if you're sitting in a theater with people, works a little differently because you can hear everybody else in the room. There's a kind of collective feeling to it that's missing when you just watch. But I hope it still works. I mean, Louis Armstrong is so funny and interesting, and the tapes are so odd that I hope it worked sort of despite that.
It's beautiful. It feels so personal, and as you said in the film, you feel like we're spying on him. We're in the room with him. It's really special the way you do it. When you're going through the archives, do you ever find moments you think this is too personal? Did you find anything which was?
Oh yeah. I made a film about Buckminster Fuller, and he has this enormous archive, and with all sorts of stuff in it, his laundry receipts, his grocery list. There's everything in it. And at some point, I came across some Polaroid photos of him naked, sort of posing like the Leonardo man. It looked like in a hotel room or something, and I just with who to explanation, but that was far too personal to actually. I probably shouldn't even mention it, but I did, but I never used them. I mean, there's certain things where you're going through people's papers, but I pointed out in the Louis Armstrong piece that he was very deliberate about these tapes being preserved and being part of showing who he was, because the tapes really show a full portrait of him and all the things he was into, the kind of joyfulness he had, but also he talks a lot about using marijuana, and he was a complicated and full person that the public didn't really know about during his lifetime.
How much of yourself do you show through your live performance, or how much do you hide? Like, what? Tell me about the reason for, as a filmmaker, one of the reasons why I make films is because I don't like to be on camera, but you put yourself very much on the forefront. And
I know it's funny because
it's really brave.
Like all I think all filmmakers in some ways are I am, and I would guess other people are sort of shy, and filmmaking gives you a way to watch the world and see things, and it's a kind of license to observe. And so that was always my MO. Filmmaking allowed me to talk to people and ask people questions and stuff like that, but always was a shy person in some ways. So when I got into live cinema, it was sort of reluctantly. I made a film, and I sort of had to have some voiceover with it to explain it, and thought, oh, well, if I talk in person, it'll be better than just some disembodied narrator. And so it's funny because I've sort of backed into it. I must have some secret ham inside me because I actually kind of like it. It's thrilling. It's scary as hell to get up in front of people because you're very vulnerable and you could always mess up. But I do like it. And so it's been odd. One of the things that I feel about my own filmmaking, and maybe you feel the same way, is I don't want to make the same thing twice. I don't like doing the same kind of movie over and over. I always want to do new things. So starting to do live cinema was great because it got me out of a certain kind of filmmaking that I'd done, and I'd felt like I could do that. I wanted new challenges.
Sure. One thing which I feel permeates these shorts, and not to bring the conversation down too much, is there's a presence of death within Pet Cemetery. You're talking about pet deaths, but there's a beautiful simplicity to it, which really gives you the audience a moment to reflect on their own mortality. And this goes through many of the films. Like, where does this come from? How, if you're comfortable to talk about it, how can you talk about this?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's always a little funny to talk about your own work, but it's a valid thing. And I guess I'll just talk about it a little. I probably have a certain kind of melancholic wistfulness that, I don't know, maybe it's a genetic thing or a cultural thing. My heritage is Eastern European Jews, and they tend to be melancholic and wistful in some ways. And so maybe it's that, and just a sort of like, I worked with Yola Tango because I love the emotional palette of their music. There's a kind of a beauty and a slight sadness to the songs they play. And I felt there's a lot of songs they have that really resonate with me for that reason. Those two things together are very poignant, or can be poignant for me in the right measures. And so I guess everybody has their own kind of emotional sort of settings, and certain things resonate with them. And I've had loss in my life, so I'm, as many people have, so I kind of have a awareness of death and loss and time passing and all that. And I mean, that makes life, the flip side of that is that makes life more valuable and special, and it's important to seize the moment because of all that. So it's part of life. I don't know. I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely, and I really feel that maybe we have an emotional frequency which is similar, because they really resonate with me. And that yeah, that there's something really special, especially about the Yola Tango soundtracks, which really, yeah, do something beautiful. So thank you for making these beautiful films. We're going to open it up to the audience soon, so if there's any audience questions, that'd be great to have. So first audience question, how a bit about the process. How long did it take to shoot the fog? The fog touches the ground, it's amazing. Can you tell us about the whole experience of shooting the fog in San Francisco? And this is something we get here in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. Like, we often wake up in the fog, so we know how it feels here.
It's funny because that film, it was so, I cringe now thinking about it, because I'd made this big film about Utopia that was a complicated idea, and it required travel and archival footage and money to license archival footage. And so after that was done, I thought, I want to make something really easy. I live in San Francisco, there's fog. I'll make a movie about fog. It's just right around here. It won't be hard. And I was so wrong about that, because if you try to, that's true, but if you try to film the fog, it's elusive as hell, and so I do these things where I'd get a camera person and get somebody to interview, and a sound person, and make plans, and then the fog was supposed to show up and it wouldn't show up, or we'd get in a car and see the fog on the other side of town and drive over there and it'd be gone, it'd go somewhere else. So it actually was incredibly challenging to film. And so what I did, I worked with a friend named Andy Black, who's a great cinematographer, and we, in San Francisco, the real foggy months are September and October and some of November. And so we filmed for several years. Just in those months, we'd go out a couple times and try to film, but it wasn't a project with any kind of urgency. We just, did it out of fun, but it was super. That was the hard part about that film, is just finding the fog. And the other thing I learned, maybe this is true in Abu Dhabi, is when you're in the fog, it just looks gray and crummy. It's best looking if you're outside of the fog looking at it, and it's like a blue sky with fog. That looks good. So I learned a lot about how to film fog. But there's a funny thing in movies. People, there's a great noir movie in San Francisco where a woman looks at her watch and it's so foggy she can't see her watch. And that never happens. Fog is never like that. It's always kind of in the distance. It doesn't like envelop you. So it was funny to kind of get past the myths about fog, or my wrong notions, and wrestle with the real fog.
Yeah, here we often, or used to, when I lived on a high building, we used to wake up above the fog, and that's really beautiful.
Wow.
It's really
Wow. That sounds great.
It's beautiful. Highly recommend
Somebody
it.
should make an Abu Dhabi fog film.
I should make an Abu Dhabi fog film for sure. Absolutely. Next question from the audience. So this is about the creation of the program, and is there storyline? Was there a thought to the creation of the program? Personally, I love the. I also love your film about the San Francisco Film Festival pieing. Which wasn't included tonight.
Yeah.
Can be found online. Was there a thought process behind the creation of your films tonight?
I think it's when you sort of put together an order of films. Sometimes it just sort of like, let's do it this way and see how that feels. I mean, in some ways, you want to have some things that will draw people in at the beginning, and then easier at the end. So it wasn't a matter of telling any particular story. It's just sort of almost a rhythmic musical order to the pieces, which I hope worked.
Nice. Question from myself about when you're doing the live performances, how much do they change? How much do they vary?
Well, there's two ways in which they change. One, as we do the pieces, sometimes we change them to just make them better. And that's the way, if a comedian does an act, they do it over and over and over again. And it's by doing it in front of an audience that you realize, like, oh, this joke, I got to get the timing a little different, or I need to change the punchline a little bit. So with the live pieces, by doing them in an audience, they get better. So there's that. And sometimes I've made big changes, cutting something out or moving something around. And then once that happens, there's a process or an interesting phenomenon, to me at least, where every single show is different based on the number of people in the audience, the time of day, the size of the venue, whether people have been drinking, is there a bar, whether we're feeling good or jet lagged. There's all sorts of things that go into making a show really good or really bad. And somebody could look at it and say it's the same thing every time, but in my mind, it's very different, and the audiences feel that in a certain way. So I'm really fascinated by that notion of how even a film screening can change each time it happens, even though the movies are the same.
It's a beautiful thing. So we have a question from Nora. She asks, is an intention you come with initially, or do you let the experience and opportunities as you're filming and collecting interviews dictate the final outcomes? So I guess it's about your process. How do you explore your films?
Well, it depends on different kinds of films. So with some of the films, I'm just trying to recreate something that happened to me. So the film about Meredith Hunter, for example, I had that exact experience where I was trying to learn something about this guy, Meredith Hunter, and I read that there's very little information. I read that he had been buried in that cemetery. So I went to the cemetery and said, is there somebody named Meredith Hunter buried here? And the guy who's in the film went into the back office and went through a card catalog and said, oh yeah, he is here. You'll never find it, so I'll walk with you. So I walked through the cemetery with him and asked him all sorts of questions about death, because he's a very friendly guy and he was open to anything. So I thought, wow, I can ask this guy all sorts of questions. This is great. So we talked, and when we finally got to the other side of the cemetery, it was this unmarked grave. I didn't know it. It was really devastating for me somehow to think of this person in an unmarked grave. So the film was, I made a film to recreate that. But with the mall, for example, in China, I just sort of went there and thought, how can I make a film out of this? But the funny thing is, I came home and thought that was a disaster. I have nothing to show. And it was only months later I looked at the material and thought, oh, there's something here. But that was a different kind of process. So I think every film has its own process in a way.
Do you have films you've started to make and then abandoned? Could you talk about those?
Yeah, there've been a couple. Some things just never quite take off, but I forget about those. I can't even remember.
I understand. With What do you think of Give Me Shelter? In a way, your film about the Rolling Stones concert feels like an addition to Give Me Shelter.
Yeah.
Like, did you speak to the directors? Did you did you discuss it with them? How did that process work? Because
Well, that's a very complicated and funny question, and I'll give you the short version of it, where the film Gimme Shelter belongs to the Rolling Stones. They own the copyright to it, not the Maisel brothers who made that film, which is a famous film about Altamont, and I used some footage from that. So the Rolling Stones have never licensed that film. They're very sensitive about it, so I used a little bit of film, and I wrote a letter to Albert Maisel saying, I respect your work. I'm using this under fair use. It's legitimate, but I just want to mention it to you. And so I didn't hear back. And probably 3 years later, I got a message from Al Maisel, who's no longer living. So I can tell this story. He said, you can't use that footage. And I said, I've already used it, and you guys are heroes of mine. I don't want to use it in any inappropriate way, but it's fair use, and I used it, and I never made any money. I never signed any contracts. It's just a little art project film. And he said, we went back and forth a couple of times, but after a while he said, well, no money, no contracts. Okay, that's fine. You can use it. And I said, oh, thank you so much. And he said, and also tell your professor you should get an A on the project. And I said, okay, I will, and hung up. So I feel like I have the blessing of Al Maisel for that. And,
Amazing. How old were you at the time?
This was about 10 years ago.
Amazing.
I was long done with school, but I thought I took that to, figuratively speaking, I should get an A on the project. So
amazing. Another question from Jen. What's your creative outlook like during COVID? Like, have you done any filmmaking by remote means?
Oh gosh, I've tried. It's funny. I just tried to do an interview on Saturday. I'm in Philadelphia, and I was interviewing somebody in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I hired somebody there with a camera, and they went, and I talked to the person on Skype, and the person I hired was in the room. It was very complicated. I'd never met either the subject or the person filming, and it was a total flop. It didn't work. So it's complicated. I mean, I'm still hopeful, and I'm still trying to work and figure out ways to work. And, I think in some ways it's good. All obstacles and challenges are helpful in a certain way, but it's definitely hard in a way that it wasn't in normal life pre-COVID, where I just would have gotten on a plane, gone there, done the shoot. It would have been great. I could use the in-person chemistry to help with things. So it's hard. It's hard, but gotta be creative. Sure. Yeah.
We do. Question from Bill. 32 Sounds is going to be an anthology of sorts of a large number of short films, as opposed to a single narrative portrait like your other features. Does this process feel closer to making a feature or making many shorts at the same time?
Wow, who is this Bill guy? That's a great question. That is a really good question, and I love. So the film I'm making called 32 Sounds. The title comes from a great film, a film I love called 32 Short Films About Glenn Gould. And that's a portrait of the musician Glenn Gould through, you guessed it, 32 little short films about him. And some of them are documentaries, and some of them are films with actors, and some of them are animations. And it's just a very wide range of little poems about him that add up to a larger sort of meditation. And I really like that form. I like that form a lot. And so I was inspired by that. And so this will be similar in that, and Bill has a good point, where in a way it will be like making 32 short films. But the only thing is, it'll be making 32 short films while still simultaneously keeping in mind the fact that they have to hang together. That not only do they have to hang together visually and cinematically, but they also have to add up in a certain way. So the films that showed on this program today were made with no consideration whatsoever for the other films. I never thought when I was putting together the Louis Armstrong piece, how is this going to play with the Pet Cemetery piece? And that's fine. A program of disparate shorts doesn't need to hang together, but this will be a unified work. And so all those little 32 individual films or individual poems have to work and resonate with each other and all the other films. So it's an interesting creative challenge and kind of creative set of jujitsu moves to do this. But it's a good point you raised, Bill.
So last question, we're coming up to the end of our time. With this time of reflection, have you been dreaming about future projects? Have you been visualizing films you might make? Have you been fantasizing? How has this downtime let you think?
Well, it's interesting because I mentioned this, that I just have been able to get a lot of work done with the 32 Sounds project, like read books and watch things, and a really big push of research, which I normally wouldn't have time to focus on so much. But I always have a lot of films I want to make. I, for several years, have wanted to make a film about Meredith Monk's pet turtle. She's a famous musician and composer, and she has a pet turtle she's had since the 70s. And I think that her turtle is such a great metaphor for time and many of her feelings about time and longevity and stuff like that. And so there's lots of projects I dream about, but right now I'm sort of focused on sound and totally obsessed with sound and boring everybody I know, talking their ear off about sound. So that's my current focus.
Well, we're really looking forward to seeing that. And 2021, will it be early 2021?
2022. Yeah.
2022.
And hopefully the world will be kind of back to some sort of normal by then.
Sam, thank you so much for your precious time. This has been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's great talking to you, Joe. Thank you. And I hope the translation worked, if anybody's out there using it.
Thanks to everyone at the Arts Centre, and yeah, stay safe, everyone. Bye for now. Thanks, Sam.